Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. The presidential campaign has been in full swing for months, and if you listen to the Republican candidates, they are presenting what to most New Yorkers must seem like an alternate universe. It's hard to keep up with the demons du jour for the Republicans: Mexican immigrants, TV debate moderators, Planned Parenthood, Muslims in general, Syrian refugees in particular, and of course the old standby President Obama, who remains in the role of the ultimate other to the slice of the electorate, bemoaning the fact that this country is on its way to being a majority-minority country within a very few short years. Donald Trump continues to lead the pack, playing to the cheap seats, whether it's thousands of imaginary Muslims dancing in the streets of Jersey City as the Twin Towers fell on 9/11, or seeing hordes of rapists hiding among Mexican immigrants slinking across our borders. Never mind that more Mexicans are now heading back home than are coming across. The facts don't get in the way of what appears to be an unapologetic, nativist and xenophobic vision we have not seen it since the days of Joe McCarthy and Father Coughlin. But it's not just Trump. The so-called adults in the room try to avoid being outflanked too far in the right, including Jeb Bush, who said that maybe a religious test prioritizing Christians over Muslim Syrian refugees might be acceptable in the wake of the Paris attacks, which of course were committed by radical jihadists, though Syrian refugees of all religions were fleeing. On the Democratic side, things have been a lot more orderly, which if you're of a certain age, meaning old like me, is quite the switch. Hillary Clinton seems to hold a steady lead over Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who has forced a national discussion of democratic socialism without the sky falling. On a policy basis, Republicans are peddling a hard-right vision of government as the enemy, even as they appeal to voters who benefit from public schools, Social Security, subsidized health care, and agricultural crop subsidies supplied by that very government. Marco Rubio, the 44-year-old Florida senator who is making a generational appeal, even found himself forced to disavow the very immigration reform proposal he negotiated with, heaven forfend, Democratic Senate colleagues that included a lengthy and tortuous path to citizens for millions of undocumented immigrants who now live among us. This would be entertaining were the stakes not so high, but they are. We're at war in the Middle East. The levels of economic inequality remain stubbornly high, even as the country has dug itself out from the worst of the recession left behind in 2009, and our planet continues to warm from the effects of more and more carbon pumped into the air. Of course, that comes from scientists, and Republicans say they cannot be trusted. We're joined by four New Yorkers to talk about the campaign and whether the political center where elections are traditionally decided still exists. L. Joy Williams is a Democratic political consultant and founder of LJW Community Strategies. Jaime Estades heads the Latino Leadership Institute based here in the city. Harry Siegel is a columnist and editorial board member at the New York Daily News. And Charles Tien is a professor of political science at Hunter College. Joy, let me start with you. You know, the old line is that when it comes to presidential politics, Republicans fall in line and Democrats have to fall in love. And it seems now that Democrats seem to be falling in line, even as the Republicans are playing this very strange game, looking at people who are not the kind of mainstream. What's going on in the Democratic Party? Is there a taste of victory that they don't want to let go?
Well, I think from there are a certain part of the Democratic Party that just want to win, and what candidate can we pick that we can actually win this election, because we definitely don't want to go back to Republican rule, I should say, after President Obama. So there's that. There also is a very much apathetic part of the Democratic Party as well, who are upset about the sort of inevitability of Hillary Clinton. Who may
just
not
as
be,
they were in 2008.
Yes, just as they were in 2008. Not completely swirled up in, the Bernie Sanders or feeling the burn of Bernie Sanders, because they ultimately don't believe he could win in a general election. And then for the other candidates that sort of fell to the wayside or not gaining traction, it's because of those two big polarizing things happening in the Democratic Party. So there is not one particular candidate in this race that Democrats can both fall in love with and fall in line with. People are voting, or pledging support to candidates on the Democratic side based upon this, who can we win with? And that's not necessarily alone going to motivate people to the polls in a general election.
I mean, Hillary Clinton is running in part saying it's time for a woman president. We've never had a woman president, just as we never had an African-American president in Obama. I'm not going to ask you about, I'm sure you're excited at the prospects of a President Cruz or a President Rubio, he says facetiously. But identity politics is sort of turned on its head. In the Republican Party, you have a nativist identity politics going on.
Well, it's interesting because the Republican Party usually is the party in which Latinos and African Americans usually don't favor historically. However, you have two Latinos running as Republicans, Ted Cruz, Cuban, both Cubans. And
he's not a Canadian? I'm sorry.
Canadian, Cuban, and then you have Rubio, who even forgot when his parents came here. And he said that they were exiles and they were not from the exile.
Right. They came before the revolution.
Before the revolution. So, and then you have Hillary Clinton, very different from the 2008 presidential election, in which you have the first African American with possibilities of winning who won. So now you have two Latinos running and a woman running.
And an African American Republican.
And an African American Republican who at one point, for a couple of weeks, was the number, it was ahead of everybody, a Republican African American, unheard. So a lot of crazy
actually, not unheard of. If you think about Herman Cain, had the same kind of flavor of the week at one point.
At one point,
2012.
But Carson at least has stayed there in the first three for a couple of months. So it's very interesting that even when we're dealing with identity politics now in 2015 and 2016. You have Latinos and you have a woman with possibilities of winning the Democratic nomination, and two others with the possibilities of winning the Republican nomination, which is very interesting. And something that I think that is happening, especially with Rubio, is that the Republican Party was expecting to have, before Trump came to the race, they were expecting to have a ticket of Kasich from Ohio and Rubio perhaps as a vice president from Florida, because there are 29 electoral colleges in Florida. First Latino ever to run in the ticket. And Trump comes and destroys the whole plan of the Republican Party. If there is a reason why they are upset, is because they had visualized Ohio and Florida as the two states that basically decides the presidential election traditionally, basically locked up by those two candidates. Trump has destroyed those possibilities. If anything, I believe that whoever wins the nomination of the Republican Party is going to be picking, if it's not Rubio, it's going to be picking Rubio as a vice president, because it will be the smart thing. First, they're going to get 29 electoral colleges possibly from Florida, possibly, and also will get the Latino vote, which is not going to be enough, because in order, the studies basically are saying right now that in order for the Republican Party to win with the Latino vote, it has to be around 47%, which is like 5 or 6 points more than Bush got when he won his last election.
When he won in 2004. Right?
So we have all these variables in terms of identity politics that are very interesting right now.
Charles, you think that this argument that the parties have been pulled to the extremes is maybe overstated when you look at the data? I think we talked particularly when you looked at the data in Iowa.
Well, in Iowa, the primary voters aren't
the caucus goers.
Right. The caucus goers, the primary voters across the country, actually, they are not the cause of polarization. Right. Some observers are blaming the polarization on the fact that those who are participating in the primary elections and in the caucuses are more extreme. But the data show that they are simply more interested in politics. But in terms of their ideology, they represent your general election voter very well.
I want to come back to that in a second, because Trump, interestingly enough, is the least hard right ideological candidate in the in the bunch. Harry, you're representing the media, which is nothing I like more than beating up on my former profession. But the media's role, the traditional moderators of public discourse, whether it was the party leaders or what Sarah Palin calls the lamestream media, are not, if this was their intent, are not able to control the process in the way they were traditionally expected to control.
Well, that's on the Republican side, really. And a big thing that's happening there is let's burn everything down. So you have all these Tea Party voters who came out in 2010 and 2014 and did very well and said, hey, we're gonna reverse Obamacare and we're gonna have a smaller government, a big revolution, and it did not. And those voters got very upset. So support for American institutions pretty much across the board is down. Congress is the worst at 8%. Of Americans say they have confidence in it. Print media is at 22%. So there's not a ton left there for these sort of gatekeepers. And Trump, who's gone very hard up moderators, including at Fox and Megyn Kelly, who I think might have been his allies in certain ways, has just said, forget about all this. I'm going to bring this message out directly, and I'm going to talk to people who are voting but are broadly angry or disgusted, and are disgusted at their party too. And that's been remarkably successful. And he talks directly to his Twitter followers. It's crazy Hall and Mirror stuff. Like if I'm wrong, why am I so popular? And then he keeps being popular. He gets ratings. People cover more and more of this. He says demonstrably untrue things, is called on them, mocks the reporters who bring this up in sometimes obscene ways, like makes fun of people's physical handicaps. And the people who love him, who love, burn this thing down. This system is not working for me, are just happier and happier. So you're seeing in some ways what had been the traditional centers and the gatekeeping roles just no longer hold for the Republican Party, for the role of the press, for all that. And what it means is we actually get to Iowa, and through this cycle remains to be seen. But there's plainly a lot of angry people who are participating largely to express their contempt and are essentially hoisting Trump up as a sort of middle finger to the system we have, and to the moderators and the nerds and the fact checkers who are supposed to be commenting on it.
Can we talk about why people are angry?
Sure.
I mean, because that seems to be the overall conversation of the campaign. People's individual frustration about their job or lack thereof, about immigration, about government in its entirety. There is this, what folks like Donald Trump and others who are capitalizing on that is that people want someone else to blame for that. And so who do we blame, and who have we traditionally blamed has been other people. So whether they be refugees, whether they be, we see all of these numbers of an increasing population of people of color. Well, they're the ones who took your jobs. They're the ones who are preventing you in this PC world of being able to speak your mind, of you being able to speak your prejudice or speak your, whatever you have. So they are capitalizing on that feeling. And we've seen this in, there have been a number of reports about the decline of the white working class, which has always been sort of the whale that even the Democrats have always tried to balance, getting the white working class vote while still maintaining votes from people of color in order to win elections. And as that is particularly shrinking, there is this, I can't hold on to my job. The economy is slipping away from me. I don't understand this. And so people like Trump are capitalizing on that fear and on that feeling of terrorism, of the economy, of, I'm losing my house, my job, and everything, and I can't hold on, by saying this othering that is happening to this country is the culprit, is the responsible party.
The day of this taping is the 51st anniversary of Senator Joseph McCarthy's censure by the United States Senate. Now, Joe McCarthy was either the evil senator he was also the manager of the New York Giants, actually, in the 1930s, but that's not the one that we're talking about. And, clearly when you talk about the other, and Obama is the ultimate other to the minds of these of these people, it is identity politics, except it's kind of flipped on its head from the way that, you had the Democrats building up the melting pot, building up, taking pieces and putting together this coalition. Is this identity politics flipped upside down?
I think that Americans see the other also in the other party. So it's not just the immigrants but we have self-sorted ideologically, culturally, religiously.
From the media?
Yes, and also now geographically. So liberals, Democrats actually prefer to live in cities, in smaller homes, with shorter commutes. Republicans prefer the opposite. So all of this has added to polarization in the country, and I think it makes it difficult to reach compromise with the other side because we socialize less and less with the other side because we don't live near them, and you know the partisan media has demonized also the other side to make it extraordinarily difficult to have an adult conversation and to reach compromise.
We hit that very dramatically with the refugee conversation post-Paris. A couple things happened. I think 36 governors, almost all Republicans are doing very well in state houses, said, nope, don't want those refugees. And they meant different things by that. Some of them were like, we'll take the Christians. Some of them were like, no one at all. It was really mean-spirited, and it was bizarre because this was an actual security debate as opposed to signifying about others. And really othering folks, it would have been about people coming here on European visas, which actually includes a lot of potential terrorists. But Europe is a much more recognizable place, and so we didn't have that conversation at all. The presidential candidates instead it was only refugees, nothing to do at all with people coming here from Europe, which has an incredibly mixed population. With all sorts of people maybe we should be worrying about who've been doing some terror things in Europe. So you have the governor saying this, and then you have a ton of mayors, including Bill de Blasio here a little belatedly, but getting there, coming out entirely on the other side. We'll take them all. Immigrants are wonderful. The more people we can have, the better. We'll deal with the security stuff, not an issue. And it was a very dramatic expression of these dense, very bright blue dots, many of them on the coast. And then these spread out reddish and pinkish areas that are geographically most of the country. And you felt the split between the people representing those larger dispersed populations and the people who are in these dense urban settings, who are increasingly democratic and liberal, and their politics and their starting points were almost entirely different. And Chris Christie, of course, you know, is a guy who's in Jersey and has to appeal to different constituents, but now is running in a Republican primary, suddenly saying, I want the 3-year-olds, you know? Give them 15 years, they're going to be blowing things up. It was obscene. He knew who he was speaking to. And when you're talking to the Republican Party and sort of speaking for governors at that point, the argument is no, none of this at all. Like what are these people? I don't recognize them. And that split has been really, really pronounced in the cycle. If you just pick up the questions in the two sets of debates, it's like you're talking about two different countries with what the parties are addressing.
Yeah. But that's, go ahead.
Yeah, but also candidates, they do the traditional thing at the same time, which is that they basically pander to their base. Mm-hmm. De Blasio had to say that because his base is not necessarily a white male base. Mm-hmm. It has to do with African Americans, Latinos, people who have been here for a long time, who have second and third generation of immigrants. So he had to say that, and it's happening all over the place. But what I find is very interesting is that if you see the percentages, Trump has around 25. Today, Quinnipiac study came out and said he has, I think, 27% approval. Then you have Ted Cruz, who has around 16%. And then you have Rubio ties 16%. Those three are the ones who have been saying the most outrageous things. And Ben Carson, who has 15. If you add all those percentages, that's over 50% of the Republican Party who's basically following these people who have this rhetoric, which is extremely aggressive, anti-immigrant, pro-white male, because there is the other issue with the Republican Party, with the Tea Party in the Republican Party, which is that they have this obstination that they think that they can win with the white male vote still. And that is reflected in maybe in that 50% above that is encompassed by Rubio, Cruz, Trump.
Yeah, but we also saw this.
Two Hispanics and a black man.
But we,
exactly.
But we saw this in 2008 when there was an insurgency from the right and John McCain won. We saw it in 2012 when there was this, wild insurgency, the Michelle Bachmans and the Herman Cains of the world, this wild insurgency from the right. and Mitt Romney won. Now, I'm a Democrat, and I actually always want the Republican, because I don't think Hillary's going to lose, but I think that she could, and I want the Republican who's going to do the least damage to the country, even though that Republican is probably the toughest one to beat. Mm-hmm. But, Republicans ultimately, traditionally, come to that, the Jeb Bush, the John Kasich's of the world as their nominee. That's what you're seeing now on the Democratic side, as opposed to the Republican side.
Well, I think a couple of other things to their point as well. That remember, because even in the those primaries where you had people playing to people's fears and that particular rhetoric, it's a shell game. Right, because if you look at the states where these Republican governors are, who are refusing, we don't want any refugees here, we don't want Obamacare, we don't want all, and then look at the number of people in poverty and the state's economic advancement, even for white working class or white folks in poverty, right? Their constituents would benefit from Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. They would benefit from a lot of these policies that would help lift them out of poverty and into the middle class, or help sustain the middle class, right? So the shell game is to play into people's rhetoric and fears about their education, their economy, and I don't want people living, next to me, and I don't want, this fear of terrorism, all of that. And you pay attention to that while I'm also continuing to perpetuate these policies that keep you in the economic state that you're in. Because people will always vote, particularly that population will always vote for policies because they believe that I will be there economically one day, and I want to make sure that I keep the money that I have when I get there. They're voting based upon when they get to the middle class or upper middle class, or when I become wealthy, rather than voting on policies that will benefit them where they are.
And it's the issue of people voting against their interests.
Yes.
And
this has gone on since Reagan Democrats. These were what we used to call Reagan Democrats.
It's getting more exacerbated, even worse now. We have, in the Latino Leadership Institute, we opened an operation in Florida, non-partisan operation, to do get out the vote training and voter registration. And we're going to start soon. And I just went to Florida a couple of months ago just to put together the operation. And above the I-4 corridor, which is very important for the presidential election in Florida, Tampa and Orlando, above that, we have Mexicans working in farms. Mm-hmm. The KKK is there. And I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. And everybody told me, yes, the KKK is here. Very radical, but even those who are not KKK, they tell people that they don't care about the presidential election. This is what they were telling me. People voting against their interests. And they say, so what do they care about? And they say, well, the only thing that they care about is basically ending the union. Secession. I mean, that's how radical certain sectors in the South of the United States, that's where they are. So they don't care about Obamacare. They don't care about Medicaid. They don't care about Social Security. They don't care about services or welfare that can help them. Mm-hmm. It's the poor sector in the United States, the poor geographical sector. Their interest, it's like people are still fighting the Civil War in the year 2015.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
And the decline of unions in terms of the power of unions in certain states, the complete destruction of unions, they're not, part of the reason why a lot of jobs, particularly for working class whites and, middle class have declined is because the union has declined, right? And so people, that helped build a middle class in this country. And so you can see a direct result, a direct correlation of the decline of unions, the decline of focus on people having a right to work or having a right to a job with this increase in poverty and economic instability.
Except that, I think that those jobs went away. I think technology had something to do with it. Automation had something to do with it.
Oh, absolutely.
The offshoring of jobs to China, now Vietnam, Thailand.
And notice that those voters don't prioritize to those governors and those elected officials that they bring or focus on bringing those jobs back to the United States. There is no clamoring from the Midwest in saying, you Republican who represent me in the State House, making sure that there are policies and laws that keep jobs here. And then even in the tech industry, we're focusing on, in the tech industry on their industry is not as diverse. They're not accepting or retaining a diverse worker. Unions possibly could assist with that.
But you also have the case that people voting against him, just Donald Trump has some great apostasy. He goes against the received wisdom. He thinks that you could raise taxes on hedge fund managers. He's not willing to talk. I think it was today, he refuses to say we should do away with Roe v. Wade. I mean, Donald Trump is almost. It seems to me that the nativism that you talk about the Tea Party and the ideology of the Tea Party. Well, maybe it's not ideology. Maybe it's just this anger that he's channeling, because on policy, he's very much at odds with what the Tea Party is talking about. He's a much more moderate Republican.
He's a New York guy, and
he's a cynic. New York cynical Republican.
Look, there's a lot of class resentment on both the left and the right, and it has a fair amount in common. And Trump is tapping into it, and Sanders is tapping into it in some pretty significant ways. I don't think either of them.
But what does it tell us about the Tea Party? You talked about the Tea Party and the small government. Was that really, maybe that's not the driving motivation?
What's not the driving motivation?
The smaller government, et cetera, et cetera. When you see Trump come in here without the kind of, without falling in line with the kind of political orthodoxies that supposedly are the Republican orthodoxy.
I think you're right that Trump is not an ideologue, and I think the reason he's leading in the polls right now is one, because of the immigration issue. He's certainly not the only anti-immigrant candidate on the Republican side, but he's certainly the loudest and probably the most vile of the Republican candidates on that issue. And I think the other reason he's at 30% and leading the field is because the rest of the field or the Republican establishment has not found the candidate that it can back. So there are so many other candidates that are fracturing the rest of the Republican field that you add up all their votes, all their supporters, and it gets to 70%. So I think Trump is capped at about 30%.
Well, Trump has been at a cap and has not been able to move above the cap, which is a minority of a minority party. But
and he's not the second choice of any of the other supporters either. So when these candidates drop out,
he's
I
also,
think you'll
though,
see the others
he's also this idea that the mainstream leaders, that the elders of the party, are petrified at him getting the nomination. If he starts talking about raising taxes, he's now going after their wheelhouse.
Right. So he's established, in a big way, that the establishment, the party establishment, isn't what it was. And for all the Democratic, progressive New York Times fears about outside money, which there's a lot to, that outside money has done nothing to derail Trump. In fact, for the most part, it's just stayed away from him. Jonathan Martin, writing in the Times this week, points out that one of the reasons that the establishment has held off on Trump is, first off, he's a hell of a counterpuncher. But a big thing is that behind Trump, and one person some of his votes could go to, is Cruz, who is universally loathed by the establishment, exceptionally loathed.
Unacceptable. Who's more unacceptable.
Because he's been there inside the Senate, and he is not liked. He is not liked by his Republican colleagues there. He's not someone they trust on very personal terms. So in some ways, Trump, who does have this cap but is not going to end up being the nominee, is sort of a protection against Cruz surging, which is an interesting thing. But basically, all the outside mediators that are supposed to guide and shape this process, the TV networks who decide who gets in the debate, the party structures that once really mattered and at this point look more and more like shells, they've just been unable to get in the way of this one fairly determined guy who actually hasn't spent very much of his own money. What he's done is him and ISIS are competing for the most effective earned media play. I'm serious. In America right now. They say some nonsensical, outrageous thing. They repurpose stuff they've said before that there's actually nothing new to, and they get hours and hours and hours of coverage. It's really distressing. That there's no violence on Trump's part the same way, but they figured out how to hijack the system just from a media perspective and to suck up the limited bandwidth that's there. And none of the establishment places that are supposed to stop that have succeeded. And it's why the establishment Republicans who don't want higher taxes, who have interests in common with finance, and with big industry
Wall
don't know
Street.
what to do with this guy. Yeah.
I think, and you touch on it as well, I've been consistently annoyed, is more the case, with how the media has played a part in propping up someone like Donald Trump, and even the comments and stuff that have been in this election cycle, and still said that we're just reporting what's happening. Because particularly, just look at the differences here, right? In the beginning of this process when Trump was in, no other candidate would media outlets, mainstream media outlets, go and set up shop and actually air his entire remarks or entire speech at some random gym or like they do clips and maybe they do the beginning of something, for other candidates, but they have actually gone and for ratings, because he's a good ratings draw, and from this earned media, done the entire speech. I've seen that at least 2 times. In following him in the beginning of the process, no one else did that. They didn't do that for any other candidate.
This is the old reporter in me. Then you think the media should make a judgment that even though Trump is leading the polls, he's beyond the pale.
This was before he's in polls.
Beyond the pale, and that therefore there should be a decision made not to cover him, even though by most definitions he's newsworthy.
But then how is the decision made to not cover Kasich or to not even cover Hillary Clinton? I mean, this was during the part where her emails was still a major part of the discussion, and they would still cut away and not cover her entire speeches.
That's
on
good. That was good for Hillary. That a lot of the email controversies got buried in the Trump.
That's a false choice, right? Like the Huffington Post did this absurd thing. We're only going to cover Trump in entertainment because he's a clown. My newspaper puts him, basically in a clown costume on the cover every time chance we get. But the thing is, that is, do you cover him? Do you pay attention to what he says? Do you respond? Sure. When you start giving this guy vast swaths of real estate to just be entertaining, and this is you realize the extent to which news is just a little part of these larger media empires. It's shrinking. It's in a little bit of a panic, and like this guy gives a bit of juice, and that drives a lot. He drives traffic online. He drives ratings for these debates in a big way. He's saying, "I'm not going to go on the next CNN one unless they give $5 million to veterans." That is this horrible circular logic where I'm a winner because I'm winning, and I'm winning because I'm a winner, and then you give what amounts to tens of millions of dollars of free airtime for him to be entertaining on. He's very entertaining, because a guy who's willing to just say things, knows how to perform.
To a degree, he's entertaining in the same way you can't look away from a car accident.
Sure.
So, but the same is the Bernie Sanders phenomenon comparable?
Well, in the Quinnipiac poll today, Hillary is 53% above Sanders. I think that Sanders was a phenomenon during the first 2 months of the campaign. After the hearings and after the first debate, I think that Sanders, he still has his base, but the appeal to others who are moderates, Democrats or independents, has decreased. I don't think that he's a phenomenon anymore. I think he has a base. I think that he's staying in the race, basically. Like Warren, Senator Warren has not endorsed Hillary yet. Sanders is going to stay there because the left of the Democratic Party is very interested in making sure that if Hillary wins, at least that she will adopt some of the progressive agenda of the Democratic left. I think that is a strategical decision by Warren and Sanders to basically Sanders stay in the race and Warren not to endorse Hillary in order to have that effect in her platform. But I don't think that he's the phenomenon that he was at the beginning. 53% after he had such a big push at the beginning, that's a big difference. This is Hillary's election to lose at this point. It's completely different from the Republican Party.
I also think that this is one of them. I'm going to come to you in a second, but it's also, I think Paris. I think the terrorist attacks on Paris, exposed Ben Carson for. To call him a foreign policy neophyte is to be unfair to neophytes. I mean, that all of a sudden people said, this is a serious job, this guy's not up to it. It kind of reinforces all of Hillary's strengths, you know, to the degree that Hillary is the most experienced candidate to run for president since George H.W. Bush, since Bush won, if you're just looking at a resume.
So I think part of what's driving what you see with Trump and with Sanders, not so much anymore, are the polls. So I think Trump is getting a lot of attention because he is leading. So yes, he's saying some crazy things, but it's also the fact that he's leading in the polls. And Sanders had a lot of attention, I think, paid to him when he was doing much better in the polls. When the focus was more on Iowa and New Hampshire, where Sanders was doing much better and drawing big crowds there, the media was paying more attention to him. Now, you see Sanders' numbers dropping, like you mentioned, especially when you look at nationwide polls. He's not doing anywhere near as well as what he does in Iowa and New Hampshire.
We're going to go to questions in a couple of minutes, but just as one point, why are we having a free discussion of socialism and our heads are not exploding as a country? What is it? You know, I mean, why is that happening?
Occupy
Sanders, Wall Street,
Warren. We've had this shift in the conversation. We've never had capitalism or socialism. They're just sort of abstract terms, and they were the limits of what you could politically discuss. And now you have a guy who says democratic socialism, and people are reasonably cool with that. In fact, most of the Democratic Party, he probably has at least some of their hearts, which is an interesting thing. With Hillary, I mean, yeah, she's the 3 a.m. phone call lady and all that. And she traveled to a whole bunch of countries, which is cool. Like, as far as I could tell, like her signature foreign policy, like real thing was being like, let's get involved in this air war in Libya, which is now where ISIS is setting up its like backup base in case things don't go well, and is probably the signature failure in certain ways of the Obama administration, even though we let the French take the lead. And I am stunned that these other candidates, I think it's because they are neophytes, and both parties aren't just pounding her on this. This isn't Benghazi stuff. It's just she strongly supported this war that led to a failed state that is now a major terror haven. She is the lady who voted for the Iraq war, which cost her dearly in 2008. And for whatever reason, she's got a near total pass on the issue, which just perplexes me.
She said that she made
points to the way this is amateur hour this time around. In 2008, Edwards was very gifted. The press was lazy and left it to the National Enquirer to knock him out. And that three-way dynamic, and Obama was incredibly gifted and had demographic advantages as a black Democrat coming in, and a serious, credible one. It sort of worked out that way. But minus all that, Hillary's a juggernaut. She has a ton of money. There's a reason she's up 50 points. She's good enough, and people think she can win, and the rest of this is sliding.
And I think also, just to the foreign policy piece, it's not just because the candidates themselves on the Republican side or other candidates on the Democratic side may be really, really green when it comes to foreign policy. It's also because those of us, the voting public, also are not don't completely know what we're supposed to do, what strategy we're supposed to take in the wars or in the conflicts that are happening overseas, right? So we know, so we don't know. We know that we don't want to send troops over there, but then what do we do? And we know people are coming over here, and there's this terrorism, but we don't know specifically who's responsible. There's not as if there is one particular state or one particular country that is attacking us. It is all, it is all very new and not, and therefore confusing for the voters themselves. So that's what makes it more difficult.
But if you look at in particular Marco Rubio, who I believe is kind of the up-and-comer as the alternative to Bush among what would pass for the acceptable mainstream Republican candidate, because he's also making a generational appeal, he wants to put boots on the ground. He's the most hawkish candidate at a time when this is a war-weary country. So,
well, today things have changed, I think, with what happened in San Bernardino in California. Even before today, the polls were saying that the attention of voters in the United States since Paris is basically in foreign policy. It's not so much in domestic policy. That's what the polls have been saying even before what happened today. Today we have an attack in San Bernardino that we still don't know exactly what happened or who did it, but if it happens to be related to any Muslim community or country.
But we don't know that, right?
We don't know yet, but if that happens, you will see not Trump as a candidate, but maybe as a prophet for the Republican Party, which is extremely, extremely scary and ugly. This morning, he woke up by saying, we need to bomb the families
of ISIS.
You know, that's how ridiculous it is. But the thing is that there is a shift in terms of domestic policies to international policy, and things are going to get dangerous because then the most militant, the most crazy ones in the United States in politics, they are going to take advantage of that.
Yes, sir. Tell us your name and your campus, please.
My name is Jacob Hochberg, and I go to Queens College. And a question for the panel: who do you believe Donald Trump would pick as his vice president?
I said
that he's going to be and I think he does have a chance to be the nominee. Let me not discount that.
At the beginning, I said that any rational person who wins the nomination that is not Rubio, should pick Rubio as a vice president, because Florida, 29 electoral colleges, is the first time that there will be a candidate for vice president of the United States that is Latino, is a young, and I think that he has the whole package.
Except that you're liable to see Secretary Castro on the Democratic
on
side.
the other side, because for the same
That's
reason.
right.
Yeah.
You see, these people, they have been analyzing this for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. They know that Rubio is the candidate for vice president if he cannot win the nomination. So any rational candidate in the Republican Party should pick Rubio. I just don't know if that is going to happen.
Rational and Donald Trump?
No, I'm being sarcastic.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Zana Dokic. I go to Hunter College. My question is, if you had to choose one candidate on the Republican side to address income inequality, who would you choose?
I know who I would pick, because I'm familiar with his work, which is Governor Kasich. I'm not a real TV moderator. I just play one on TV, and in my real job, among the issues I've worked on is juvenile justice. And Kasich is a man who, took Medicaid, took the Medicaid portion of Obamacare, has worked with a group called Right on Crime, which are right-wingers who align with left-wingers in terms of making changes to the criminal justice system to minimize incarceration, et cetera, that he's made. He's unafraid. He's a veteran of government, and the man knows. He's been a governor. He was a committee chairman, in Congress, and I just think he has. I don't think he has contempt for government. I can't. I don't agree with John Kasich on a lot of things, but I think as a man, and I feel the same way about Jeb Bush. I used to live in Florida. I knew Bush. I knew Jeb Bush. I don't believe he's nearly as right wing as the game he's playing, though maybe I'm wrong on that. But also, if you'll pardon the expression, what I said in my opening is the adults in the room. So,
I think they're all fiscal conservatives, and I don't think any of them would address income inequality in a sufficient manner. The Republicans have spouted the same economic policies since Reagan, which is trickle-down economics, and that's what has driven inequality to the depths that we have right now.
Yeah, I would have to agree. There's nobody, I think, there are certain people that I can live to fight against, but not necessarily believe that I can, throw, some support that would actually...
I'm not throwing support his way. I'm just saying the people who I believe would do the least damage to the country.
No, not least who would actually address it. I don't think there's anyone on the side.
Kasich.
Huh?
Kasich, he's sensible. He's an adult. He's brought the issue up. The ones who bother me the most here have probably been Bush and Rubio, who've done I'll just grow things faster, which would be wonderful, but they have no coherent plan for how they would do that. I do think growth as opposed to inequality is really the underlying question.
But there's the inequality, which really does go back to an awakening tied to the recession and Occupy Wall Street. I think Occupy Wall Street dramatically changed the conversation in this country, and it fueled Bernie Sanders. I believe, forced Hillary Clinton to the left to kind of confront some issues that she had not confronted. Although I think when you talk about her on foreign policy, I think one of her great achievements is little known is the empowerment of women through microfinance around the world, which she's been very active in. You know, she had a women's agenda that does not get covered in terms of what she's done. But I think that the inequality, you know, there's almost it's almost that what's driving Trump is a sense of inequality. In
a different way.
In a different way,
right.
And also your argument
they are
that they're
taking
getting
from you.
people to vote, and of course they're getting people to vote against their own interests.
Yes.
Is what your argument is on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that there is someone who is taking from, not the people, it's not our policies. It's not, the laws that we have that favor banks. And it's not, it's not any of that. It's them. Is pointing the finger and sort of doing the othering and its social programs, which are small percentages of, so having people focus on that rather than sort of these larger, change in banking policy would have more of an impact on addressing inequality and improving our economy than drug testing people on public assistance, right? So in being able to understand that difference.
And the Republicans are pushing basically the same economic policy when you talk about supply side that got us in the dumper in 2008.
If you look at all of their policy proposals today, I think it's all the same stuff, more of the same stuff.
Tax drove us in the ditch once, and we can do it again.
Tax cuts for the rich and spending cuts for the lower class. And I think that's part of the appeal of Bernie Sanders also on the left is I think mainstream Democrats probably see Hillary as a moderate.
As more of a mainstream. She represented Wall Street in Congress.
Right. And Bernie Sanders is the only candidate, I think, of from both parties that would have serious proposals.
Yeah, but you also have a debate that's the kind of key distinctions. Her vote on the war, his vote on some gun bills because he's from a very rural state. She's exploited that appropriately, and he's exploited her vote on the war appropriately, but yet the temperature, we're all veterans around this stuff. We've seen Democrats who tear each other apart, for practice. And we're not seeing that on the Democratic side. And that's why I'm so that's my argument about falling in line instead of falling in love. And to me, that's very encouraging for the prospects of winning the White House. But
I think the underlying argument and debate on the Democratic Party side is something different. You see that with, those in the Black Lives Matter movement, other people of color who the Democratic Party has traditionally relied on for votes and is the base of the party. And so while you may not have this mainstream fight of candidates between the candidates. It is a very subtle one to mainstream, but very major to the base of the party, because now the party and the candidates have to incorporate and truly respond to the issues of the voting base, that of Latinos, African Americans, and particularly how they're going to infuse their policy, not just token tickets to things and, key plum jobs, but specifically how is a Democratic candidate going to address double-digit unemployment among African Americans from the past 30 years? And it's not just individual jobs, but then what policy specifically are you going to address? How are you going to fundamentally change the relationship of policing and law enforcement in these communities? Because we've been experiencing that, and people of color have been experiencing that under Republican and under Democratic candidates. And so what you see, the rift is maybe not the candidates fighting amongst themselves, it's the base fighting to the candidates.
So what you have is everyone has plans for what they're going to do for black people in particular, and especially in criminal justice terms. And they're reasonably serious and reasonably substantive, and that's nice. If anyone was serious about this in the Democratic Party, if they weren't just taking black voters for granted come a general, obviously there's some competition for them now, and Sanders got in late but is trying. You know,
And let me just
you'd have people say, fire Rahm Emanuel now.
Let me interrupt you
Exactly.
for 1 second,
It's
just to pay respects to Governor O'Malley, who,
Yeah.
who we've been totally ignoring, but who's a pretty substantive guy
Yeah.
as mayor of Baltimore, governor of Maryland. So,
He is.
and
he's
has addressed a lot of these issues,
Yes.
perhaps in a more thorough way
Yes.
Yeah.
than
I agree.
than either.
Absolutely.
After Freddie Gray, he went from barely relevant to the race to that guy. But look, if any of these Democrats were serious, they'd say McCarthy isn't good enough. You had a 400-day cover-up of an execution. You had another cop who shot a black lady after a separate dispute while off duty in an alley outside his house while off duty. And it took him 500 days to fire him. And it was like 2 days before the video came out. Chicago's got a long, distinguished history of horrific treatment toward African Americans from law enforcement, and nobody could say this is not all right. What Rahm Emanuel has done, and we know he was Obama's guy, somebody we respect, but this can't stand.
Right.
And to me, that just shows the party's
Next.
disinterest in really addressing this.
Right.
Let me take the next question. Tell us your name and campus.
Hi, my name is Kristen Rieger, and I go to Queens College. And my question is, which one of the candidates on the Democratic side would be best for college students seeking to cover their tuition and expenses?
Bernie. Bernie wants to give everyone lots of stuff and have a ton of it be free, and it's not totally clear I'd pay for this, which is a general question with Bernie, but that's definitely the answer. He'd like to give you a lot, and it would be awesome.
Free tuition.
Yeah.
However, I think that, you know, and there are people on the Republican side talking about trying to make, this is not so much a CUNY question, but for people who are going to private colleges and more expensive state colleges, you know, state universities, to try to graduate without debt. I mean, there's programs that there's all kinds of programs for dismissing college debt if you go into teaching, if you go into the military, if you go into the police department. So there is a lot of discussion that's burbling around now around both the incredible burdens and the scams involving student debt left, you know, decades after you've graduated college, and how you deal with it. So I think there's actually a major focus right now.
Well, I'm in favor for free tuition as long as it's retroactive. But I would
I
also.
went to Brooklyn College when it was free. It cost $30 a semester in student fees.
Don't
and when they
remind me.
raised it to $50, we shut it down. I'm not recommending that because I work for CUNY now.
Don't remind me. I'm always reminded by those of you who is just that I should have been born 10 years earlier. Attached to that is not only the tuition, but then the also despair of people graduating, not only with the debt, but then not having a job, right?
That's
and
right.
we have to address overall that there is a serious joblessness, like where are the jobs that everyone is seeking, both young people graduating from college, those who don't go to college, what jobs do they get? There's a lot of concentrated unemployment in rural areas and urban cities. Like, so there has not been sort of that larger conversation, and not yet happened in the presidential cycle, of where are the jobs that everyone is seeking.
Yes, ma'am. Your name and your campus, please.
Hi, my name is Joanna Bisono, and I'm from Bronx Community College. And my question is the following: if there's any chance that Hillary Clinton wins the election, do you think she will pick Bernie Sanders as a vice president, or vice versa? It can happen.
No.
I mean, I think she's going to pick Secretary Castro. I mean,
Yeah.
which I think is because the Latino collapse, the collapse of Latino support in for the Republicans is an ace in the hole in Nevada, in Arizona, potentially ultimately
It is the same.
one day in Texas.
It's the same issue with the Republicans. It seems that the demographics have changed so dramatically in terms of the Latinos in the United States that both parties, they have to pick a Latino, especially for this election, as a vice president. So there is no way that Sanders. Forget about the Latino issue. It's just that Sanders is too much to the left, to Hillary and to Hillary's interests and Wall Street and her connections, that she cannot have Sanders as a vice president.
Yes, ma'am. Your name and your campus, please.
Hi, my name is Banapsha. I'm at John Jay College. My question is for Ms. Williams. As a woman, do you think it's more important to vote for another woman, or do you think it's more important to vote for a capable candidate?
I think it's important to vote for a capable candidate. And, you know, we often get these questions all the time, and people asked during the previous race, were people voting for, you know, Obama simply because of race? And certainly while there may have been people that have, you know, that did
And
that.
there was resentment
And
for
there
people
was
that were
right.
saying we need a woman, and now there's black guys coming in and taking it away.
Exactly.
Right.
But I think overall, and we mentioned a lot about identity politics, is that there is an intersection in terms of who voters are. They are not singularly alone women. They are not singularly alone African American. There are a number of different identities that make up an individual voter. And so you can say, you know, as you mentioned, talking to black voters, well, I'm just going to talk about criminal justice and about law enforcement, but what does that mean for African American women who are also concerned about economy for a different way, and that we've been advancing in terms of degrees. We start businesses more than anybody in this country, and so now our focus on the economy is how do we maintain and increase our wealth. And so even though we're starting more businesses than anybody else, we still are low in terms of maintaining wealth. And so I think what is often missed is, having run a number of campaigns, is making sure to look at voters in their entirety, and not in simple individual identities, because then you get in trouble and you lose.
Yes, go ahead.
Let me just add that I think with Hillary, you get both a very qualified candidate, maybe the best qualified candidate in the field right now, and you get a woman.
Right.
And you know, she's got the most experience, foreign policy experience, domestic policy also. She's been in the Senate. To quote a song that we were talking about earlier, the Hamilton Broadway show, right? She's been in the room where it happens, and she knows
I think
how
the best
sausage
resume
is
since
made.
since George H.W. Bush.
And a great example of that is I would vote more for Hillary Clinton than I would for Carly Fiorini or whatever, however you say her last name.
We're running out of time, and Harry will understand this. I never miss deadlines, so thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on CUNY Forum. Thank you.
Thank you.